Welcome everyone to the Remarkable Women Powerful Stories series. All I can say is the year is moving on very quickly and it's hard to imagine we're at the end of May already. So I thank you so sincerely for joining me for today's conversation with our very special guest. As many of you know, I'm Lynn Foley, the chairman of the Zonta International Leadership Development Committee, and it's an honour always and a privilege to host this series. I wish to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and also pay that respect to any First Nations people present. Zonta International is a leading global organisation of professionals, and we work towards empowering women worldwide through our service and advocacy. Now in its second century, we have more than 25,000 members in 63 countries working together to make gender equality a worldwide reality for women and girls. Since back in 1923, Zonta International has provided more than US $41 million to empower women and girls and expand their access to education, healthcare, economic opportunities and safe living conditions. So now it is indeed my pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Kendra Sharp, who's joining me, I think today from Oregon, USA. Good afternoon to you, Kendra, in your part of the world. It's lovely to see you.
Good afternoon, Lynn. Thank you. Yes, I am in Oregon.
And I figured that by your background, that's where you're likely to be today. Dr. Sharp's a professor of mechanical engineering at Oregon State University, currently on loan to the US National Science Foundation, where she has been serving as the head of office of international science and engineering since February 2021. Previously at OSU, she served as senior advisor for global affairs, where she provided leadership for the development and implementation of strategic initiatives in internationalization and global engagement. She's also an Associate Vice Provost of Faculty Development previously. She founded OSU's Humanitarian Engineering program and was named the Richard and Gretchen Evans Professor of Humanitarian Engineering. She believes deeply in the value of interdisciplinary education and research and using engineering and technology for positive social impact. With extensive international research and teaching experience across the world in places like the Netherlands, New Zealand, Pakistan and Thailand, as well as a pile of recent rewards, Kendra, awards, I should say, the Erskine Fellowship from the University of Canterbury in New Zealand, OSU's College of Engineering's Faculty Mentoring Award, the American Society of Mechanical Engineering's Edwin F. Church Medal, and the OSU's International Service Award. And particularly for us today, Kendra was also a recipient of the Zonta International Amelia Earhart Fellowship in 1998. And was an American Association for the Advancement of Science and the American Institute of Physics Congressional Science Fellow in the US Senate in 2001. Dr. Sharp received her PhD and Bachelor of Science degrees from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign and master's degrees from the University of Cambridge and the University of California, Berkeley. So Kendra, a powerful, powerful career history you have. And I'm feeling very honoured to be speaking with you today. And I do thank you for your time. So let's get going.
Okay.
Your career and professional achievements are truly inspiring, and you've many awards that acknowledge this success. And I know everyone today is really interested in knowing lots more about you, your work, your achievements, and what or who has influenced you throughout your career. So perhaps we can start with a little bit of your story of growing up, family, and how the experiences led you to where you are today and how that might have helped you choose your profession and career.
Sure. Thank you so much, Lynn. And first of all, just let me thank you and thanks Zonta International for hosting me today. It is truly an honor to be here and to be amongst the women that you are interviewing for this particular series. Yes, I'm very honored by that. So to respond to your question, I grew up in a suburb of Chicago, and I can't say that I have a particularly extraordinary childhood or family story. My mother was from New Jersey and my father was from West Texas. And I grew up in a Chicago suburb, and then I went to the University of Illinois. but I was thinking about what were some of the key factors that influenced my choice of profession, career, and even lifestyle. And one of the things, so this was very important to both of my parents, is they really saw education as your ticket, that education is a ticket to success. So very much valued that. They additionally valued culture. My mother, in fact, just retired after 71 years playing church as a church organist.
Wow.
She just retired. She's now 85. And so they always had me participating in cultural opportunities. And then we did a lot of travel too. So we traveled all around the US and then started traveling internationally when I was a little bit older. And I think all of those things put together just made for what the things that I value. And they're very much the same things that I value with my own children. So, those was that. And then in addition, I'll just say, and I mentioned my mom just now, so I had a very strong and independent mom. And that certainly influenced us growing up. I'm the youngest of three and I'm the second daughter, but my mom really had a big impact on me. She's very resilient and she's been able to weather an awful lot in her life.
It's amazing, isn't it, how much our parents, sometimes it's our dads, sometimes it's our mums, but that piece of how we're influenced, or the role model, and we possibly don't always realize that until we're a little bit older, do we, that they've been such an influence on us. Yeah,
Yes.
that's amazing. How do you think that upbringing and the way in which you came through your childhood, how do you think, if it did at all, lead you to how you chose your profession? I guess we'd be really interested in how you ended up going into engineering.
Well, so I mean, I think like a lot of high school students, I was really good at science and math. And I lived in Illinois. The University of Illinois has a very strong engineering program. It's also the state university, and it's where my brother and sister went. They were older than I am. So when I was thinking about college, I really didn't think too hard about what I would study. It just seemed natural to go into engineering. And then there was the question of, well, which engineering? Well, aerospace engineering. And part of that is I just really love the planes. Part of it is I heard that it was the most challenging engineering program at the University of Illinois. And so that was the one for me. And that is what I went into. And my career has changed a little bit, moving from aerospace engineering into mechanical engineering, but still very much along the thermal fluid science. That is, my roots remain in the aerospace and fluid mechanics area.
It's really interesting, isn't it, how sometimes we fall into things because we're good at the subjects that lead us in there, and then we do. In your case, it was a good fit, obviously, because you've continued to stay in that field and work in that field and be very successful. When we first met, you talked to me about some of the early opportunities that were really pivotal in your career, Kendra. Perhaps you could share some of those with us and how you discovered your voice and potential through those experiences. And I particularly, and it's not about me, it's about our participants, but I'd really love to hear more about that early opportunity you had as a Congressional Science Fellow back in 2001, as well as any other pivotal moments.
Sure. So I want to touch on something you said. I mentioned that when I went to college, I really just went into engineering. It seemed like the thing to do. And in fact, if I were to do it again, and what I would advise my daughters is to really think about it. Is that the right fit? So yes, I went into it, and yes, I did very well at it. And I think about the classes that stuck out to me. And one class that really stuck out to me was political science and international affairs. And that I have noticed, so I've gone through my career as an engineer, and it's gone quite well. I've had a tremendous amount of opportunities, and I think I've had opportunities that I would not have had if I weren't in a STEM field. So I'm grateful that I really had those opportunities and had the chance to be in STEM. But as you've seen from my introduction, you heard a little bit about my career, and I've definitely ventured off into some of these areas around international affairs or diplomacy. So for me, it's been this kind of ever changing. So what's the right way to use my experience and my STEM background now? And asking that question, and we'll talk about that, I think, a little bit later. But I think it's a question of not only like, what's the right fit now, but what do I do with the skills that I've gained so far at the current time? And those things can change. I think that they can change and morph a little bit. So I will point to, well, one of the things that happened at the University of Illinois, this is always or often true, that you have key people who believe in you. And there was a woman there who encouraged me to apply for these international prestigious fellowships. And one of the ones that I applied to was the Churchill Fellowship. And they only award 10 nationwide within the US, and it's for 1 year graduate study at Cambridge. And I was awarded the fellowship. And so that was, that was a phenomenal opportunity. And in fact, it's also a way that I connected with my future PhD advisor. And I think back to, like, I might not have applied for that if I hadn't really been coached and mentored by this particular person. So there are, I think that there are these little tipping points where somebody is able to kind of shift what you're thinking about and really offer opportunities. In terms of the Congressional Science Fellow, so after my PhD, I had a chance to apply for this. I was very interested in science and policy, and I applied for it. I didn't have a lot of background. I found out later I was an alternate for the interview. So I just got lucky that got the interview because someone else dropped out, and then was awarded the fellowship and ended up working in the US Senate. And I really look to that as a fascinating, absolutely fascinating and formative experience. I had been working on studying fluid mechanics in very small channels, so really tiny things in the laboratory. And then I went within just the space of a couple months to looking at the enormity of the US science and technology enterprise from a bird's eye view in the US Senate. And that was very powerful. Now I chose afterwards to go back to an academic career. And 20 years later, now I'm back in the science policy area in a very different position from the National Science Foundation.
Yes, it's really, sometimes it's, I don't know, do you wake up some mornings and think, wow, I'm in a great place. I'm not quite sure how it all happened, but here I am and I have this amazing opportunity to influence. That's my reflection back to you. I see, particularly now in your role in the National Science Foundation, that absolute opportunity to continue to influence globally, or to even move further towards influencing globally. Have I understood that correctly?
Yes, you have, absolutely. And it's funny because when I applied for this position, I know we can talk a little bit more about it, as I thought, gosh, do I have the skills for this? And I've only been in the position for 3.5 months, so not very long, but I'm just seeing so many different ways that I have been prepared for this. And it's just all these different things, whether it was negotiating an MOU with an international university, or working on a USAID project with international partners, or working in an administrative job, navigating all of the relationships across the university, or developing a strategic plan. There are so many things that I think have fed into and helped me prepare for the position that I'm in now, that I feel like it's a great fit for me.
It's interesting you just made that mention, just coming in, and while seeing you've made it, I'll just draw you out a little more on that piece about, oh yes, I've applied for that job and I've got it, and then that moment of maybe it's self-confidence or self-belief or something that kicks in. And I'm not 100% sure it's a female or a girl thing, but it seems to happen to women a lot, is you get it and you go, oh, but should I be here? Whether it's imposter syndrome that just passes across our mind, or in some women it stays. So I'm wondering, do you see that a lot, and has that affected you at various times in your career? And if so, how did you deal with that? Because I know the people who listened and watched these webinars are particularly interested in that. Please.
So that's something that I thought about quite a lot, in fact, in applying for, because I mean, I've applied for a number of positions, and you don't get them all. You certainly don't get them all, and you might have a string of positions that you don't get in a row, and that can be a little bit discouraging. But I've continued to, when I see an opportunity that looks like a great fit, to go ahead and apply for it. So what I found was, I applied for this position at the National Science Foundation because I saw it on Twitter, of all things. So that's a little kind of a funny way that we see positions now, but I had seen it on Twitter. And I got to the first interview, and then I was invited back for a second interview. And I thought, gosh, what do they see? How could I possibly be one of these candidates that's getting to this second interview? But gosh, I don't have the background for this, do I? And then I realized, so the people that were interviewing me are extremely accomplished and whom I have a great deal of admiration and respect for. And I realized that if I said to myself that I don't belong here, effectively what I'm saying is that they're not making a good choice. And if you think about it that way, then I mean, I respect the people who were interviewing me, and yeah. So I mean, we have to trust that they know what they're doing, and I don't exactly know what they're looking for, and they may be, you know, there's lots of different things that people may be looking for, and you never really know what they're looking for. So perhaps I had the right combination. I mean, I'd like to think I had the right combination.
And once you get to second interview, then you've had the chance to put forward your value proposition. I talk about that a lot, that value proposition. You've had to show them your personality and your background. So they've had a lot of opportunity to see if you've got all of those pieces and it will be a good fit. And you're right, it's trusting that the people that are making the choice, isn't it? That's a really interesting way of looking at it. And I've not probably even looked at it that way myself in the past. So I'm sure that'll be of particular interest to the people watching today or the ones that watch our recording in the future. It's, wow, yes, it is about the people making the choice of us.
Although, I mean, the flip side, I think the flip side of that is to not put too much stock, because you never, as I said, you don't exactly know what they're looking for. And I know this happens a lot in academic positions, that universities may be looking for someone with a slightly different expertise than what you have, or they may be looking for a more junior person or a more senior person or an experimentalist. And there are a lot of factors that can play in. So I think on the one hand, when you get to a stage and do feel a little unsure, to be able to trust that the people who interviewed you the first time were making a good decision. But the flip side of that is if they make a different decision, to understand that there are a lot of factors that aren't necessarily personal to you.
And while we're talking about the job you've recently acquired, you did say to me in our introductory interview that it was your dream job. Why is it your dream job?
Yeah, it's so I mean, the first thing is that it's well, there's only one of them in the country, and not that selectivity makes for a dream job, but there really is only one of these. In my administrative role as senior advisor for global affairs at Oregon State, it's the senior international officer for the university, and it's the largest public state university in the state of Oregon. And I was becoming more and more intrigued by what we refer to as science diplomacy, and I had been looking for more ways to get involved. And when I was exploring some different avenues, some which would be temporary or volunteer, working on committees or something else. And when I saw this one, I thought, gosh, you know, that would be really cool to be able to step into a job like that. I'd get to work on high-level strategy for international collaborations between the US and other countries, work on bilateral and multilateral engagements, and think about how to better support researchers across the US in their own efforts to collaborate internationally. And so I mean, it is true. Some of the things that I was trying to do at the university are things I was trying to do at the university scale. And then and I really enjoyed those, and I loved those, and I loved the team that I was working with. And this was a chance to really step it up to a national and an international stage. And that is bearing out, in fact, and it's quite fascinating. So I'm really enjoying it. It's a phenomenal time to be in this role.
Have you yet been able to go from Oregon to Virginia? Because you did tell me that the NSF's based in Virginia. Have you yet been able to get there?
I have not. So I have not gone there yet. The US government is still working in really a remote work posture across the federal government, and the National Science Foundation is no exception. So we're in our maximum remote work posture at this point, and I'm still working from Oregon.
Yes, so you'll eventually get to meet your team over there face to face at some time in the future. And I think so many people across the world are in that situation. Here in Australia, we're much more privileged, I think, and we feel a bit special that we're out and about and travelling. I live in Queensland, the northern state, in Brisbane and Toowoomba, and I was in Canberra last week, our national capital. So, you know, we're getting to travel around for now, but we never know when that will change. I'll just before I go on to the next question with Kendra, I'll just remind our participants that if you'd like to ask Kendra a question during the Q&A later on, please put your questions in the chat. So can I focus you now back on this notion of humanitarian engineering and the opportunities through that to make a difference in our, I guess, in our society. I must admit, I hadn't really understood that until I met you. So I'm sure some of our participants would be interested. So can you give us an idea of the sort of way you've taken engineering into that humanitarian space for us?
Sure, and I think let me just say, and particularly you'll see this in Australia, that it is referred to as humanitarian engineering. Sometimes the field is also referred to as engineering for global development, and I think that's probably a better term. Other places it's referred to as global engineering, where you're integrating different disciplines to look at complicated problems. But what we so our thinking on it is being able to use engineering or technology to address global development challenges or to address basic human needs. And what that has looked like in my area is to look at renewable energy technologies, particularly for remote areas, particularly for areas that are unlikely to become part of to be put on a national grid anytime soon. So looking at electrification, looking at renewable energy, looking at clean water. And one of the things that we've been doing with water is we were looking at, for example, an institutional sized cook stove to pasteurize clean water, very efficient cook stove to pasteurize and to make water drinkable for a hostel. And the benefit there is by having a very efficient institutional sized cook stove, not only can we remove the pathogens from the water, but we can do it so efficiently that even though it is still relying on biomass or wood, it is so efficient that it requires much less wood. And that means less deforestation, which is good for people, it's good for the planet, it's good for the environment as well. So that just gives you an idea of some of the types of projects that I've been working on. And we've one of the areas that a project I had going on for a number of years was we were part of a US Pakistan Advanced Center, advanced studies in energy, and that was in renewable energy. And some of our areas was to look at the hydropower and the thermal energy. So I worked with some colleagues here. We hosted a number of Pakistani graduate students and did trainings and helped develop curriculum, worked with our colleagues in Pakistan to develop curriculum for their own institutions. So that was a really interesting project that we worked on for a couple of years and built some capacity amongst students. And it's good for our students too. It's good for students both ways. We're learning from each other.
Absolutely. And so I'm suspecting in moving into that field, that goes back to the time when you were studying and you were talking about studying in politics, etc., when you were probably in your undergrad degree. And I guess it seems to me that engineering background has helped you, as you said before, integrate all of those things on behalf of better societies and better communities. Perhaps.
I think that's true, Lynn. And a point that I would like to make is there are different ways to get involved with whether it's international affairs or policy. And for me, I really do identify with the STEM track. So for me, the science policy and the STEM-based policy making is really the right path.
And you got a taste of that, didn't you, back when you spent that year or the best part of a year as a science fellow, Congressional Science Fellow?
Yes, that's exactly. Yes.
So let's segue off into STEM. Of course, I'm an educator through and through, and STEM is certainly, the science, technology, engineering, mathematics world is, I guess, where we're asking our young people to go and to develop skills and to develop a desire to be in that space. Of course, everyone can't study there. We need people in a lot of the humanities areas as well. But with that in mind, what do you see as important? And I guess, can you give us your reflections on an experience about STEM, and particularly women going into STEM, because the data across the world would say to us that women are still not coming through school and into university and into those STEM areas at the level that we would like them to, so that they can affect the future of the world. It's like they're not yet there to be researchers, etc., to make a better world for all of us.
So what is the question is what, I guess,
Yeah,
what are
I'm
my
sorry, that
views
was
on
a little
that,
bit,
or yeah.
it was a little bit convoluted, but so what do you think is the future, and how is it all of us can work with young women to consider STEM so that women take their place in that research and development space to make our world better in the end?
Sure. I mean, I think there are so many different pieces that play into this. So some of it is cultural norms, some of it are systems that are in place, some of it are the teachers, some of it is how we talk to our young women, whether they're in elementary school, middle school, high school, or college, and how we describe the professions that we work in. And I think one of the things that's important, or one of the things that I found, and I started working in graduate school on really trying to recruit more women into our mechanical engineering programs. And I worked on that as a graduate student and then as a faculty member, and did this for some time actually. And it was really difficult to push the needle at all. And then we started this humanitarian engineering program. And a couple of the key features is, first of all, the social impact. So one of the things about this is it's very easy to see when we start talking about the projects and start talking about the work, is that you can see the positive social impact. And that's key. And then another thing is that we talk a lot about the interdisciplinarity. So we work very closely with social scientists. We work across disciplines quite a lot. And I think that because it's important to understand that we're working with people. These are the solutions. Technology is not going to solve all our problems. We really have to look at how technology is integrated, what other systemic systemic oppression that's in place that's impacting whether or not solutions will actually be able to solve the problem, public health. There's all kinds of things that I think play into solving these problems. So if I think about, what do we do? There's obviously a lot of work that goes on in improving STEM education and in removing biases from our educational systems, going up through, starting at the young age and going through high school and into college. And then I also think some of it is about how we talk about what we do, and how we talk about it is actually solving problems, whether it's humanitarian engineering or whether it's mathematics or statistics. There are, I mean, you can pick any field, or I mean, for goodness sakes, now like epidemiology, right? I mean, there's all with COVID. I think it's so easy to make the case that science and research, it is only because we had all of this research that was going on that when we had this pandemic, we were able to very quickly put together a vaccine. And
Yes.
that vaccine didn't come out of nowhere. That vaccine is built on decades of research, decades of science research, and decades of medical research. So I think we need to understand, how does science help us, or STEM overall help us solve our problems? And that's a much easier case to make this year than it has been in the last. I mean, it's a very easy case to make this year.
And hopefully that'll be an impetus for both men and women to choose something in that broad area of STEM, because yes, I think it would be naive of us to think that when the pandemic started to show itself back in November 2019 around the world, that at that point scientists went, oh gosh, we need to make a vaccine.
Right.
As you say, there's so much there that's been done, and it is amazing. I think it's one of the most amazing feats in my lifetime that within less than 12 months of that, we were having vaccines already in trial and almost being ready to be rolled out. So I agree with you, and STEM is important, but in that whole space of not every young person today will end up working in a STEM field, because we certainly need people in the humanities, people in the social welfare sector as well, and it's how they integrate and work together, isn't it, that matters.
Absolutely, yeah. And I'm a big proponent of I'm a big proponent of needing to work across those disciplines. So absolutely. So the vaccines, I mean, there's vaccine development, but then there's also the supply chain. There's also actually distributing it, and then there are actually the people who are out understanding the inequities and trying to direct the vaccines to the right places, actually out administering the vaccines. taking care. There are so many pieces of this, and then people writing about it. We need that too. I think there's so much that you really, I think we all have a way to contribute. Yeah, we all have a way to contribute.
One of my friends and colleagues who's been a nurse all her life has now chosen to go back and is administering vaccines in her country. And I think she's on today. And that's the sort of thing that's happening. People are going back to their field if they've already retired from where they were working and saying, well, hello, I have this background, can I help? Mm-hmm. And that's the whole humanitarian piece, isn't it? We're wrapping around differently. Can I just not change the subject, but move into a slightly different subject now and talk about, now you're in a very strong and influential leadership position and have been for a number of years throughout your career. How do you think you've developed your skills as a leader? Was it deliberate, or was it as the jobs came along?
I mean, to some extent, as the jobs came along. Let me first say that I'm still developing them, that I think these are things that we develop along the way. And the one thing that has really helped me is I've done quite a bit of training in equity, diversity, and inclusion over the past 7 or 8 years, I would say, looking at systemic systems of oppression, looking at implicit bias, looking at how we address, how we think about things, how we try to make more equitable and inclusive systems. And while that seems to be focused on this equity, diversity, and inclusion, I think a lot of the lessons there have translated, they translate very well to managing an office or managing people. And this is, I mean, some of the things that I learned there, for example, I have tended to be pretty conflict averse. That's not, I don't like conflict, or I haven't traditionally liked conflict. But in this training, I started to understand that when you productively engage in conflict, then it helps you to understand your own position. Your position is challenged, and you have to think through, okay, well, if they say, well, I can't imagine that you think that your proposal would work, then you have to think about, well, why would it work, and how can I explain that to you who might be holding an opposing view? Now, obviously, there's certain views that you're not going to change, personal political views that you may never change. But if we think about within a professional context, engaging in productive conflict helps me better define my position, and it helps me open my mind to, well, there may be some things that I haven't thought about that somebody else thought about and is challenging me, that might actually, that maybe is something I should consider. So those trainings that I did in the equity, diversity, and inclusion have been just incredibly helpful across a whole range of areas. And then another way that I've found, I have participated in, for example, a 2-week Women in Higher Education Leadership Seminar a couple of years ago. But one of the best ways that I found to develop my skills is to think about being a fly on the wall when I'm observing others who are in leadership positions, particularly those who I admire, although arguably those who you don't admire also teach you something about leadership and what you don't want to do. So I have now been part of pretty high-level leadership teams in an organization for a number of years, and it's like a masterclass in leadership. So I just love to step back and observe, how are people shaping the dialogue? How are they facilitating the group and moving the conversation along? How are they communicating in person, electronically, and making sure that I take time to reflect on, what is it about that person's leadership that made me feel safe, or that made me trust them, or made me really believe, even when I disagreed with them, that they had the best interests of the organization, the objectives. Maybe they had even my best interest in mind when they made a decision, even if I didn't agree with it. So I think, when you're around people that you really admire, I think to step back and just be curious and try to evaluate, what am I seeing? What is really effective about this situation and about that particular person's leadership?
And that's it is that learning through role modeling, etc. And I guess the hardest thing about leadership is realizing that the only behavior we have any control over is our own. So you've talked about that there eloquently, about changing your response, listening to the perspective of others, and then thinking differently and changing your response, because we can't cause someone else to change unless we're willing to change. It's a really interesting, and I think once we will understand that, leadership's a little easier. So you then went on about, we've talked a little bit about role modeling. You're an incredibly visible role model, and I'm assuming it will grow even more in the years to come in your current tenure. How do you embrace that?
So that's, I mean, it's interesting because that's, if I think about it, so I hope that I embrace it with humility and with appreciation for the doors that have been open for me. I have been incredibly privileged in many ways, not the least of which is being a white woman. And I feel obligated to open doors for others. I think that's one of the things, is that I really do feel that obligation. And I've also had people just welcome me into their space, and that could be their professional space, that could be for providing opportunities, where it was really just, I mean, it was kind of their good graces. They didn't have to do that, and they did open that. So I hope that first of all, I hope that I embrace it with humility and appreciation. And so I think what that means is that I'm a little less comfortable with the role model, with thinking of myself as a role model, and I'm a lot more comfortable with thinking about it as being in a position where I can open doors and I can have a positive impact, and I can help people develop and find their own success.
That's a lovely way of putting it. I really like that. Thank you for sharing that. And mentoring, you mentioned earlier that you've had maybe some mentors or people who've inspired you earlier. Are you able to do much of that now as you're opening doors? Do you have the time and opportunity to, I guess, give back as a mentor at the moment?
Well, I think there are very different ways to do that. So one thing is I'm a big proponent of having a mentor network. So that for an individual, let's say a faculty member at my university, that they don't have to have a single mentor. They can have mentors that help them to develop in different ways. So whether it be maybe a technical mentor, or communications, or a leadership, that you can have a network of mentors. And in that way, then yes, I think that I am able to have some connection. And mentoring faculty and offering opportunities has been honestly one of the things that I am most proud of in recent years. I get so much joy from seeing other people succeed, students, faculty, and I think at this point now I'm in an office situation, and so the question will be, am I able to help my staff find success and feel good about their work? But I'll just tell you about one thing that I did recently that I'm so proud of. So I took a seminar, and this isn't meant to be perhaps a plug, but just to tell you about it. So I took this seminar with it's an organization called the Op-Ed Project, and their goal is to have bring more diverse voices into the world in terms of thought leadership and influencing the public discourse. So I took one of their seminars just as on a weekend, and then when COVID hit, I decided that it was time to revisit that, and I started working individually with a mentor editor, writing some op-eds, and I actually ended up having a piece about international students and immigration that was published in the Washington Post, and I was really proud of that. And that was such a cool experience, and I think it's so important for us, whether we're faculty or as STEM leaders, to have public engagement and to be, we're working. It's not society and then the scientists that have all the solutions. I mean, I've heard it phrased. In fact, I heard it just phrased even over the last day or two by some scientific leaders on working on society needs to be participating in science, and science needs to be serving society. So as far as this public engagement goes, this op-ed project, they offer a program that's called the Public Voices Fellowship. And you can bring them to your institution, university here, and have a cohort. And then they will run a seminar, a workshop series, and actually work with your faculty, and then have a similar type of, to really help them to grow into submitting op-eds. And it's also a leadership program, but really getting their voices out into the public discourse. And that's something that I was able to bring to Oregon State. And then I worked with colleagues around campus to identify and invite people to apply. And we had a cohort of over 20 that have been participating. And I've just heard such great things, and how people in the cohort have really enjoyed it. And I've seen their work that's coming out in all these public outlets, and it's absolutely fascinating. And I feel so excited that I was able to bring this kind of really neat, different type of opportunity to people that I care about, and at an institution that I care about, and see them, really thrive. So those are the types of things that I'm that happened before I left OSU, but I'm really pleased that it did happen. And I hope I can do things like that in the future.
And that's a fabulous mix of all of those things, being a role model, being a mentor, giving back and working more broadly. That's a lovely example. So thank you for sharing that. I noticed the time, I'll have to move along, but in moving along, what do you think are your greatest gifts as a leader?
Oh,
And
so
as a
yeah.
remarkable woman?
So I think the first one is just I'm an intensely curious person, that I'm curious about a lot of things. I'm curious not just about science or engineering, but really about culture, about what drives people, what motivates people. I'm also pretty driven. I will admit that. I've become more willing to be uncomfortable, that I'm willing to sit in uncomfortableness, willing to sit in uncertainty. And as I mentioned earlier, increasingly a willingness to confront conflict. So none of those things mean that it's easy, and they may mean that I have some challenging days and a lot of stress sometimes, but it does, I think those are the things. You asked me about what are my gifts that support me as a remarkable woman or a leader, and I think that those are some of them.
So when you do have those difficult days and stressful days, or you come up against a roadblock or a barrier, how do you work that through?
Yeah, that's, I mean, I have to take some reflection. I have to step back. I have some, I love to be outside. I love to hike. I love to spend time with my dogs and my family. So I have to step back and remind myself that I'm a whole person, that I'm not this whatever thing that was challenging. That does not define me. And so then I have to step back. I mean, it's a little bit of both. So some of it is internal reflection, reminding myself that I am the sum of the parts. I'm not just a single event, challenge, whatever it is. And then some of it too is connecting with family and friends and nature. Those are very important to me. And then pick yourself up and do it again.
That's right. Yeah, don't
Yeah,
pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and what is it? Start all over again.
that's right.
Absolutely.
That's right. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I do over the past couple of years, I have started doing some meditation, and I find that pretty helpful too, especially in learning how to handle strong emotions and to detach from that and be curious about what the emotion is that I'm experiencing, rather than being so invested in the emotion, being able to distance myself a little bit, step back and say, okay, so why am I experiencing this? What is it about that? And I find that's a helpful way to manage, manage the challenges.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. Zonta, as you know, and most people on today know, we envision a world where women's rights are recognised as human rights and every woman's able to achieve her potential. So if we reflect for just a moment as I move us gently to a close of our conversation today, the pandemic has had particular impacts on women, and for many on the progression of their learning and their careers and their well-being. Can I ask you about your reflections on this and how you think the COVID recovery should progress, or how it might progress? I'll let you take it however you wish, but there's so much, not just dialogue, but data around that space of how women are particularly being affected.
And that is absolutely something that we're seeing in the academic environment, as well as in the science funding and the science in the research segment, is the disproportionate impacts on women. So we're looking at how really what we can do to address some of these inequities, and they are disproportionate not just for women, but also people of color. So women of color have that intersectionality, and it's especially challenging for women of color. So in terms of responding to the pandemic, I think we need to recognize that it laid these inequities bare, and they need to be addressed. And if we didn't see them before, we see them now. And now we have an obligation to act. I mean, as if we didn't before. They were there all along, but they're even clearer. So it's just undeniable at this point. I think we also have to recognize that, especially for women and people of color, that there are going to be very lasting effects of COVID. It's not like, oh, we'll get the vaccine, a year or two, international travel will be back the same and everything's fine. these are impacts that are going to be lasting. So I just think it's so important that we have people in leadership positions and people who are able to think about creative solutions and then implement them. And I think that's a piece that's a really that makes me feel really good about being at the National Science Foundation, because we are absolutely having that conversation about what our obligation is, what we can do to help. And for example, we're receiving some funds from Congress for the American Recovery Plan, and we're looking at how we distribute those in a way that starts to address some of these inequities that have happened. So, I think that it's going to be hard, and it's going to take attention, and I think it asks us all to step up a little more and address those inequities.
It does, and so Zonta contributes to that. And if I go all the way back to 1998, when you were awarded an Amelia Earhart Fellowship, I'm assuming that had an effect on you at that time. What sort of an effect did that have on you as a young woman deep in the study cycle?
Yeah, well, one thing is that it's always helpful. So graduate students are usually, so there's the practicality of living on a bit of a shoestring, but then there's also just the being part of that community. And I've gone back and I've looked at the lists of the women who have received this, and it is something. It really, practicalities aside, it really made me feel part of this international circle, part of something, and part of something that was associated also with my gender, which felt really good. And I think that's just it's a really unique award, this Women in Aerospace Engineering at that level, or aerospace. So I really appreciated feeling part of something, and then it's meant that I've kind of kept a little more of an eye on Zonta International going down the road, and really appreciate the service mission.
It is, and it's that it's an alumni. It's an incredibly our current international president, Sharon Langenbeck. She was on the call earlier. I noticed she's probably had to duck off to a meeting or something, but Sharon was an awardee many years ago of the Amelia Earhart Fellowship. And yes, it is a very illustrious group of women who have played out their careers in a way that the award would have suggested they would do, if that makes sense. So you're awarded that because of your high achievement at that age and stage of career. It's not always age, but stage of career. And then it plays out in a way that award might suggest each individual does. And you're a living example of that yourself. As a remarkable woman. I have one more question perhaps, and looking at the time, I'd like to wrap it up in 50 minutes. So let's see how we go, Kendra. I'd really like to ask you about, you really probably already talked about things changing for women across the pandemic. Do you have anything else to add about over the next 10 years? How do you think things can change for women?
So I think they can change, Lynn. If I think back to, so I was in college, I started college in the late 80s. And so this isn't 10 years, this might be a little bit longer, but I only had one female professor in engineering in the entire time that I was in school. But it's different now, and it's really changing. I think these things can change. I really do. And I just see the way that we have more women in our programs. I'm seeing more women in leadership positions. I think the thing there is just to make sure that we're not our own worst enemies, and that really we are looking across the board and trying to help each other. But I think that it does give me hope for change. COVID makes me a little concerned, but as long as we are paying attention, I think that now is the time for the women in leadership positions to be especially paying attention, and that change is possible.
And we have to keep our optimism, don't we? It's very hard to drop into the pessimism space, particularly over the last 12 and 18 months. So it's how do we, as women who are successful, keep that optimism and keep working with women and supporting women. It might be an old phrase, but the sisterhood, how do we work together to support women of our age group and younger women to have a better ride and to take advantage of what's happened and then take that into the future. I agree with you. I see that Sharon's still on our conference this morning. Apologies, Sharon, I thought you had gone. And she said she's happy to hear your story and she wants to connect with you sometime soon.
Thank you, Sharon.
There you go. I was having a quick look. It's hard for me to keep track of everything when I'm doing these conversations. And perhaps our last conversation, Kendra, is what are your goals and ambitions over the next 5 to 10 years?
I thought that's a big question. I think I'm so pleased to be in my current role at the National Science Foundation, and I'm really focused on that right now. So one of my goals is simply, I think, to get to a point where I can look back and point to some of the successes in this current position. I hope that I've developed people on my team. I hope that I can point to some specific contributions that I've made, whether it's to women in STEM, to the U.S. national enterprise, to U.S. international collaboration. I think that, beyond that, what does it look like after that? That's a really hard question. And I mentioned I'm a little opportunistic about career paths, so I think we're going to have to see. But I think my goal in the next 5 years is to really, make a good go of it in the current position that I'm in and have impact.
Fabulous, thank you. Have you got a closing thought to leave with our audience today? I've extended our conversation. There haven't been many particularly questions coming in that I haven't already covered with you. So, what's a closing thought that you'd like to leave with everyone who's watching today?
So I don't know how much of a position I am to give advice per se, but I mean, I can think about things that have been, if I think about things that are at my core and that have really helped my success. The first is really to stay curious and to remain curious. The second is to be open to possibilities, because you never know what form they're going to come in. You never know when they'll come. You never know what form they'll come in. And then to be willing to take some risks, whether that's in a career or in a personal life, to be willing to take those risks. So I think that kind of encapsulates my philosophy and the being open to possibilities is important too, because I think it's so easy to narrow down and be frustrated if something doesn't happen or doesn't go the way we want, but you never really know what else might be brewing along the way. So I guess it's the what my grandma used to say, like when God closes a door, he opens a window, or she opens a window. I think, I really do think that some of those things are true.
It's being open, isn't it, to possibilities and opening doors for others, but also recognizing when a door's been opened for us. Sometimes we don't even recognize that, do we, if we're a bit closed? So yeah, so much wisdom and so much success, and I see that you have so much opportunity over the next time to really influence the world around you in your discipline and in the way that you choose to work. And particularly as a world, we've always relied on science, and what it brings to us now, even more, we rely on science. And just because there's a vaccine out there, it's not over. And we all know that. And, so I know in our country, we will still have to quarantine, even if we've been in a hotspot, even if we've had the vaccine. I'm fronting up for mine tomorrow, my first vaccine tomorrow. So I think, I'd like to make a plea to everyone to go and do that if they haven't already, and if it's available in your area too. I think it's really important, isn't it, to do that and rely on science. So for me, you're a living, breathing example of someone who's in the research field, someone who we rely on in our communities to have a safe and healthy community now and into the future. And I personally, on behalf of everyone today, thank you for that, and thank you for your contribution. You truly are a remarkable woman with a powerful story. So it's been an absolute pleasure. So I'll just do a little wrap before we go off. And again, thank you so much. And I'm, again, as always, just so blown away by the experiences that my conversational partners have. And you're a great example of that. So thank you. Thank you for your kindness and generosity in giving your time to be part of this series. So this series is, as everyone knows, is scheduled every month. And I'll be excited to see everyone around on the 23rd of June in Australia. It'll be the 23rd of June at 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time in our country. And it'll be the 22nd of June at 5 p.m. in Chicago. And everyone else around the world, I'll let you find the time that you will come in. Our guest is Holly Ransom, and Holly is from Australia and a young, globally renowned content curator and a powerful speaker and master questioner with belief that if you walk past it, you tell the world it's okay. And she's interviewed amazing people like Barack Obama and Richard Branson and Billie Jean King and Condoleezza Rice. So I'll be in excellent company, won't I, with someone with a lot of interviewing experience. And she fights complexity, and she's curious, and she's very empathetic. So I look forward to speaking with Holly, and she's just released a book called The Leading Edge, so I'm sure she'll tell us a little more about that. So spread the word to all your friends and colleagues, and watch out for this next event. And remember, Zonta International relies on the donations it gets. It relies on people like us to donate to the Zonta Foundation for Women, out of which the funds generally come for things like the Amelia Earhart Fellowship and all of the international projects that Zonta supports to make the world a better place and to move more closely to gender equality. So thank you again, Kendra. Thank you to my support team in Chicago in Zonta headquarters, Diana and Megan this morning. And thank you everyone for participating today. I've really liked it. And thank you for your lovely feedback. And there's one of your colleagues saying they want you back at OSU.
I saw that.
Yeah. And I think I've missed a question just before we roll up. I think there's a question here somewhere, and I think I've missed it. And I'm really sorry if I've missed somebody's question that's come in. So
actually, I see the question.
Can you see it?
Yeah, I can see it. It asks if, do I think institutions are more parent friendly now? Are there changes I would like to see? Absolutely. So when I moved to OSU, this is the first time that any faculty member, I believe, in mechanical engineering here a female was going to have a baby while they were as a faculty member. And I think it is changing now because that's happening more and more. Do I think that there are changes I would like to see? Yes, I think we really need to think about our parental leave policies. I mean, some things are changing, lactation rooms and so forth, but you know, availability of childcare, again, like policies, how we interpret success, what we look at when we're assessing careers, how we think about if there have been breaks in a career. I think there are more changes to come. And it goes back to that. I think we need people who are really thinking about it and in positions where they can influence processes and policies.
And it's about parental leave for men as well, isn't it? And partners, male or female partners, to also have that time off in various places. And I know in our country, our governments in particular are getting better at providing that, you know, lengthy periods of time that men can access as well, or the non-birth partner can access. So that's excellent. I apologise for missing that. It was in the question and answer box, which I didn't have up. So my apologies for not being as efficient as usual this morning here in Australia. But thank you again, Kendra. Thank you to everyone. And a lot of comments there about how inspiring you have been this morning. So take that away with you into your day.
Thank you. Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, Lynn.